Hey y'all, welcome to Soccer for Us. This is Bart, and we have a final 20-player men's Olympic qualifying roster. That's right, it's finally been whittled down to 20. It went from 48 to 31 to 28 to 20, but we have the final 20 that Jason Kreis will take into this Concacaf men's Olympic qualification tournament. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but first, please do me a favor. Subscribe to the show on whichever podcatcher you're listening right now. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerForUsPod. You can share your thoughts for all of the games that we have coming up, a lot coming up at the end of this month. And please just, tweet at us there with your thoughts. I'll tweet during the games especially and ask for your opinions, and we'll read them when we do the recap show. So twitter.com/SoccerForUsPod. And also, again, you subscribe to this show and you get all the shows in the Soccer Down Here network. Here under the Soccer Down Here umbrella, so you get the SDH Daily Show, you get Written on the Pitch with Jessica Sharman, and you get, Soccer Over There, the European version of this show. So go ahead and subscribe and follow. I would very much appreciate it. Now, a couple of pieces of news before we dive into this Olympic roster. On the senior side, the U.S. men's national team has announced it will play Jamaica on Thursday, March 25 at 1 p.m. in, I'm going to try to say this, Wiener Neustadt, Austria. That's the same place that we played Costa Rica back in November. This will happen before the Northern Ireland friendly on Sunday, March 28th. So we do get two friendlies in Europe for the U.S. men's national team. Obviously expecting this to be a pretty much only European-based squad. Not just because it's in Europe, but because most MLS players, actually all healthy U.S. men's national team players in MLS, will be in training camp preparing for the MLS season. MLS season starts April 17. I kind of don't imagine that, those players would get released right now, but we'll see. Quarantine has been weird, and we will talk about that quarantine a little bit when we talk about the CONCACAF men's Olympic qualification roster that Jason Kreis has put out. So that's U.S. men's national team news. On the women's front, the women will play Sweden on April 10 at 1 p.m. on Big Fox. That will be in Sweden at Friends Arena. This is a great matchup for the U.S. women. Sweden finished third in the 2019 World Cup. They are an historically good program, and this will be a great matchup and maybe some revenge from that 2016 Olympic quarterfinal that we unfortunately lost. Actually, the worst showing we ever had at an international competition. Interesting. So yeah, that's some match news for you, and we will obviously have previews and recaps of all of those when we get there. All right, so let's look at this roster that Jason Kreis and Greg Berhalter, but mostly Jason Kreis, has put together and will take into the CONCACAF men's Olympic qualification tournament. 20 players, 3 of them have to be a goalkeeper. Now, U.S. Soccer announced the roster, and they had some players and positions that I'm not quite sure if that's exactly where they fit, so I kind of broke it down based on where I think players will play, and we'll go from there. In goal, you have JT Marcinkowski from San Jose, Matt Freese from Philadelphia, David Ochoa from Real Salt Lake. Now, none of these guys have senior national team appearances, but Marcinkowski is the starter for San Jose. He has 16 appearances at the MLS level there and 41 in the USL. Matt Freese is probably the second best goalkeeper here. 7 appearances for Philadelphia, 15 in the Philadelphia USL affiliate, be it Bethlehem or Philadelphia too. At fullback, these are your outside backs: Julian Araujo from LA Galaxy, I should say, Sam Vines from Colorado Rapids, and Aaron Herrera from Real Salt Lake. Now, Aaron Herrera probably made this roster most likely because he can play both left and right back. He is naturally a right back, but he has played left back before. I don't think that Herrera will start necessarily, but I think having a guy who can play on either side is a positive, and that's what happens when you have such a small and limited roster. Center backs are a little bit of an issue, I will say. None of these guys give me great confidence, but they're all very experienced. Henry Kessler for New England Revolution, Justin Glad at Real Salt Lake, Mauricio Pineda, Chicago Fire. Now, Justin Glad has like a million appearances for Real Salt Lake. I'm joking. He has 126. But at 24 years old, 126 appearances in MLS. That is the most experienced guy on this roster when it comes to a professional level. I do expect him to start and be the anchor of that defense and probably the captain of this team. We'll see how that turns out. I kind of think personally Mauricio Pineda will start next to Glad, but we will see. I'm interested to see how Jason Christ plays this. And I know people are high on Henry Kessler, but for me, it's Glad and Pineda starting as your center backs. Defensive midfielders, Jackson Ewell from San Jose and Andres Perea from Orlando City. Now, Ewell has the most caps of anyone on this roster. At the senior level, he has 9. A lot of those have come against CONCACAF competition. And he also has 87 appearances for San Jose. However, Andres Perea has a lot of appearances at the professional level and 36 for Orlando City. So he is a very experienced player in his own right, but hasn't really played that much for the U.S. national team because he finally just got put into the system December. He got his first call-up. So very interested to see how Christ deploys Ewell and Perea. I think Ewell is your starter, and I think that his skill set will be beneficial to the team against teams like Costa Rica and Dominican Republic. But, we'll see what Christ prefers. Center mids, at least in my opinion, this is who will play there. Georgi Mihailovic at Montreal, Johnny Cardoso at Internacional in Brazil, Hassani Dotson at Minnesota United. Now, Ulysses Yanez at Herenveen and Sebastian Salcedo from Pumas in Mexico were both also listed as center mids, but they're wingers, and I'm a little confused how they got lumped into with those center mids. Mihailovic is probably the starter at that kind of sort of more advanced central midfielder position. Johnny Cardoso, I like, and I'm interested to see. But Hassani Dotson was the one player that kind of I wasn't high on seeing in this roster. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the next segment, but just not sure. Your forward line, Jonathan Lewis from Colorado, Jesus Ferreira from Dallas, Sebastian Soto from Norwich City, and Benji Michel at Orlando City. I said that, Sebastian Salcedo and Ulysses Yanez were listed as midfielders. I think they'll play at forward. I think they'll play on the wing, especially Sebastian Salcedo. That's his position. It wouldn't surprise me if Yanez kind of drifts into the midfield or is played in the midfield as a creative attacking player, but they're both wingers, Salcedo and Yanez. So expect them up top. And then the real battle is Ferreira versus Soto at that number 9 position. Soto has performed very well at youth competitions before, but Ferreira seems to fit the system best, and he performed well in the January friendly against Trinidad. And he has experience playing in the system, but a lot of experience on this team. Among all 20 of them, you have 862 professional appearances. You have several players, I think 11 with U.S. men's national team caps. So experience is the key term for this roster. I do want to caution anyone, we're not evaluating this roster based on what could be. I mean, yes, this is a U23 roster, so you have that age limitation. But even within this age group, it's not unfair to say that these players are third or fourth best choice at that position. I think Jackson Ewell is the highest up the depth chart of anyone in the U.S. men's national team pool. But even then, he is not the preferred starter over Tyler Adams for many people. But it's not about evaluating this roster versus what we would like to see or what we could potentially see if we had no limitations on who could be released for this age group. You're evaluating this roster based on who we're playing. Now, Mexico brought in a fantastically good squad. I'm not even arguing that. They brought in heavy hitters. I don't think anyone expected that, to be honest. I mean, most of these guys are starting for their Liga MX teams. I didn't expect them to be released, considering Liga MX is in season. But this roster that we have is still pretty good, and you have to compare it to the likes of Honduras, Costa Rica, Canada. I have to say, I think it's better. And at the end of the day, you don't have to be better than Mexico. You just have to be better than anyone else. And you have to win your 2 games other than Mexico in your group, and then you have to win that semifinal matchup against a team from Group B. That's what you have to do. It's not about beating Mexico. It's not about putting together a roster that can beat Mexico. It's about putting together 20 guys who can get you to win 3 to 4 games in this tournament. That's what matters, and that's what gets you qualified for the Olympics. Now, without any more talk on my end, I'm going to welcome a football writer from across the pond who covers MLS and really all football everywhere, but really does enjoy covering MLS and the U.S. men's national team. And that's going to be Chris Smith. So join me in this next segment as we talk about this roster and how we feel about it. Welcome to the Soccer for Us podcast, a football writer covering MLS, European soccer for a number of different outlets, like a lot. Squawka, One Goal, Dirty South Soccer, Scouted Football, and a tons more. Thank you for joining me, and please welcome to the podcast, Chris Smith. You can follow him on Twitter at CJSmith91. Welcome. I know it's late for you over in England. I have to ask, was that a penalty for Serginho Dest?
I actually was covering the Liverpool game, so I'm going to have to let you know the answer to that one tomorrow. Quite embarrassing. I've not seen it yet, so.
Well, okay, so then you got to see our boy Tyler Adams dismissed from the Champions League, but we're not here to talk about those players. We're here to talk about the Concacaf Men's Olympic Qualification Tournament. We have a roster that is out. And, I think that we both have covered this game from a myriad of angles. And I'm just curious for you, as someone who clearly is not American, what this tournament kind of means for you. I mean, what brought you to covering the men's team? You write for One Goal. And what does this tournament kind of signify for you?
Well, in terms of how I got there, obviously, it all started out with covering MLS. It just started with an innocent preview of the playoffs a few years ago and sort of descended into chaos from there and just got hooked.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah, and then I lost my sleeping pattern to go with it and everything. So obviously from there, the more you cover the league, the more you start seeing these players coming through and the national team and an interest in that. And Canada to an extent as well. It just became like a natural progression.
Yeah.
In terms of Olympics, obviously being British, I've only ever seen Britain compete in it once, and that was when it was hosted in London. So it's never been one that's been like a massive interest for me. But obviously, it's a big deal over there in the States, and I think the biggest thing looking at the rosters that have been put up so far, it's just a chance to see these MLS youngsters that we're all talking about and some of these younger players really try and flourish on the international stage and hopefully get some tournament winning experience. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, this is an under-23 tournament, so you have young players. But on this roster specifically for the United States, there's a lot of players who have a ton of appearances at the professional level in MLS and in other leagues. But before we even get into that, let's talk about some players who are not on this roster. And this is actually something that I really am glad that you're here, because you have both an Atlanta United and U.S. men's national team kind of perspective. When the training camp roster was announced, a week ago, Miles Robinson, George Bello, and Brooks Lennon were listed on this roster by Jason Kreis. And then very quickly after that, Atlanta United said, no, they're not going. They're staying here in Atlanta to train. I have to wonder, for me as a fan of both Atlanta United and the U.S. men's national team, I'm torn. But obviously you can say this is a COVID issue. But does this not kind of maybe, I don't know, hurt these players' development? I mean, what does this mean for Miles, for George Bello, in terms of just their growth as a player?
I think on a personal level, I think they're obviously going to be disappointed. Obviously, George Bello made his debut recently against Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
Miles Robinson scored, and it all looked really exciting on a national team front. And obviously, they're going to want to get as many caps as possible because it's another chance to prove themselves. And I think name me a player who isn't proud to represent the country.
Right.
From the club perspective, I can see why they've done it. Obviously, all these CONCACAF competitions and MLS clubs in particular have a real hard time balancing their own interests with national team interests because MLS just keeps on going through and CONCACAF Champions League keeps on going through. They don't stop for you. So I can see exactly why the club have done it. They've got to protect their own interests. Gabriel Ainse is coming in. He wants to make a good start. And if he was to lose Bello and Robinson, arguably his two best defenders, and then Brooks Lennon to go with that as well, potentially, then that's going to be a big blow going into a really tough opening match. So I can't blame the club too much. Does it hurt the players? I think the set up right through the national team from youth level up to the senior level. I think they're all well aware of how good Miles Robinson can be at his best. And I think they're all well aware of George Bello's huge potential. I don't think missing a couple of Olympic qualifiers is really going to hurt them that much in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I mean, George Bello likely was not going to make the final roster anyway. We'll get to the roster in a second, but I mean, he probably wasn't going to make it. Sam Vines is your starting left back. I don't think he was going to replace that. At the center back position, however, Miles Robinson is a big miss. I mean, I think he really could have helped this team out. But I do want to ask, as you look at Atlanta United and their opponent, this is something that is the opponent the important part of preparing for Alajuelense, or is it preparing for the whole season and just in general under Gabriel Heinze's kind of new system?
I don't think it's necessarily preparing for the opponent. I think we all know it's going to be a tough game. These opening CCL games are always difficult. They're one of the earliest experiences I had following Atlanta United. I think it was Herediano. I sat there watching them at something like 4 a.m. in the UK and just thought, what is going on? Like, Atlanta United is the name, and then they go down there and just get absolutely battered and come away still in the game. But Gabriel Heinze knows what kind of test he's going to get down there. I think for him, he wants to see his best players out on the pitch as soon as possible and start learning about his team. Training's all well and good, and you can be impressed with players in training, but you've got to get them over the line and onto a pitch to really start seeing how they fit into his system and things like that. So as much as, we'd love to see an MLS team win CCL, I think Heinze might be seeing this as a really ramped up pre-season game where MLS is around the corner. Let's see what these guys can do. And I think if Bello and Robinson, especially Robinson, as you say, come in and have really good games and see Atlanta through it, I don't think anyone's going to be too fussed about a couple of Olympic qualifiers, as I mentioned before.
Now, are you an Everton or a Liverpool fan, and which team needs Miles Robinson more right now?
I'm an Everton fan. I know obviously we can see each other, but there's an Everton shirt behind me there. Who needs Miles Robinson more? I think the obvious answer is Liverpool at the moment. I think they need any and every centre back they can get their hands on at the moment.
Yeah, it's funny. Aaron Long was kind of rumored to go to Liverpool. There was a weird rumor with him, but it definitely seems to be Liverpool. Quite honestly, I think both of these players have a chance to go to Europe within the next year. I think Bello more than Robinson, but I do have to ask you, as someone who knows MLS but is clearly still in the European side of things, what is the perspective of young MLS players in the UK and beyond right now?
When I started covering the league, it was still, the perspective of young MLS players, there wasn't one because no one really paid much attention, to be quite honest. Everyone still beat MLS with that retirement league stick. And I did before I started covering the league. I've got to hold my hands up and be honest. Even I went with that because I hadn't paid much of an interest to it. So, but as time's gone on, especially for those who are in the Twitter universe where, analytics means a lot and scouting means a lot, you're seeing the perception start to change. It's slow and it's quite frustrating to watch, but it is happening. People are taking more notice of MLS now as the likes of, say, Brendan Aronson goes over to Austria and as well. Daryl Dike's coming to the Championship and really hit the ground running. And even Miguel Almiron, to judge him by his goals and assists, you're doing him a disservice because he immediately improved that Newcastle team. And when Steve Bruce decides to play him in his right position, he's Newcastle's best player. So the more these players come through, the more the perception is changing, but it's a very slow process. Us Brits are very fickle.
I think breaking into the Premier League directly is a little bit more of a difficult task than, say, going to even the Bundesliga or Ligue 1 in France. But it's good to see the movement of players, and it's good to see that young players are able to develop in MLS and then go to Europe and do fairly well. I mean, I don't think we've had a complete bust yet. That said, there's a lot of players on this U23 men's national team roster going to play in this Olympic tournament that they have to have their eyes on Europe. I mean, I think there's several guys in this roster. Sam Vines is one that recently has had a lot of interest, supposedly, from clubs. But just on, you look at this roster as a whole, and we said there's a lot of experience in MLS, a lot of professional experience, not just like, oh, I played a couple games. Like, these are legitimate starters from their clubs. What's your overall take on this roster, and how do you evaluate it up front?
Well, I mean, the obvious standout, with the exception of one or two players, is it feels like a Greg Berhalter roster, even though it's not.
Yeah.
There's a lot of young kids there who have been hovering around the senior team when the European guys can't come and play, who are now getting the chance, and it's a very MLS heavy roster. But there are some players in there which I'm sure we'll come to in a minute, which I'm really excited to see. It strikes me as a very technically gifted and dynamic roster where there's no real sort of destroyer in there. There's no one up there who's just like a hatchet man. They're all very comfortable in possession. I can see it being a very sort of a technical game plan, which is something the US are bringing through anyway throughout the entire system, and something they're bringing into the first team. So at the very least, I think you can expect some attractive football or soccer. But we'll go.
I think you hit it kind of perfectly. I know a lot of people have looked at this roster and been a little bit not been very positive about it, and I think that they're looking at it trying to compare it to a full selection of players, when this is obviously not the case. I mean, you're looking at, not only is it age restricted, but you're also looking at the fact that, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, even Brendan Aronson, Serginho Dest, they're not available for selection because their clubs certainly aren't going to release them. Some other European players, Conrad de la Fuente, Alex Mendez, and others who are playing on youth teams for their big European clubs, not released. So you look at this roster, for me personally, I agree with you that overall it's pretty darn good. I mean, there's a couple of positions where I'm slightly concerned about, but overall this is a very experienced and very talented roster. Let's just dive in. We'll go through the goalkeepers real quick. JT Marcinkowski from San Jose, Matt Freese from Philadelphia, David Ochoa from Real Salt Lake. I mean, JT Marcinkowski is the starter for San Jose. I think he's probably the starter for this team. I don't really have much else to say about the goalkeepers. I think it's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, it's one of them. Marcinkowski is one I've been keeping my eye on for a while, just because of the system that San Jose play, where especially last season, it was so predicated on winning individual duels and pressing all over the pitch. You've got to have a proactive goalkeeper behind, and hopefully, I mean, he's got the number 1 shirt there. Let's hope that counts for something with the way the US want to play. So,
yeah, I think Marcinkowski is pretty much locked in, and he should be a pretty pivotal player for San Jose going forward this season. The fullbacks, Julian Araujo, Sam Vines, Aaron Herrera. Araujo will be on the right, Sam Vines on the left, and I think Herrera was brought in because he can kind of play both. Of those three, which one do you like the most?
I mean, obviously, I made some notes when we knew what we was going to be talking about, and Sam Vines was one of the players straight away who stuck out on the roster to me. Obviously, he's just signed his new deal with Colorado, had a really strong season, had a really strong game against Trinidad and Tobago. And as has been reported on MLSsoccer.com recently, there's now interest from Europe with him as well in England. I've seen Switzerland, in Denmark. So he's a player that's obviously already catching the eye in Europe. He's caught my eye. I'm sure he's caught a lot of MLS fans' eyes as Haku. Yeah, he fits that modern mould where he bombs up and he gets into attacking positions. His delivery is generally really good, and he creates a lot of chances. But at the same time, he doesn't shirk on his defensive duties as well. And he's playing in what I believe is a good cover. The underwhelmed last year for obvious reasons due to COVID and all the disruptions to their season that came with it. But I think if he gets a full season under his belt, I think he could very well earn a move to Europe. And that's not to do a disservice to Araujo or Herrera.
Yeah.
They're both in a similar bracket. Just I would say they're not quite as far along in the development as Vines is just yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, Araujo's 2 years younger than Vines. So I kind of almost think that he could be on that kind of trajectory in a couple years where you're looking at him being a full-time starter with LA and moving hopefully to Europe or a bigger league after that. The center back position gives me some anxiety because I don't think we mentioned Miles Robinson would have absolutely helped this team out. And I think it's very clear that Miles Robinson would have been the first choice center back of this group. We have right now Henry Kessler from New England, Justin Glad, who I feel like is 30 years old and has played 10 years in MLS, but he's at Real Salt Lake, and then Mauricio Pineda for Chicago. I do like Justin Glad. I know a lot of people are kind of like meh on Justin Glad. They don't think that he has a whole lot of room to grow, but I think that experience, that professionalism, and I think really for him, it's a good leadership position for him to be in. I think he can really anchor the back line, but he does have some deficiencies. I mean, do you think who's the starting two out of these three that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I Justin Glad's the oldest of the three there that are the obvious named centre backs, and I think given the experience, I think he will start. I think that will count for a lot. I do think they're really disappointing to lose Miles Robinson because I think he was a locked-in starter. But I think Justin Glad will start, and for me, I'd like to see Kessler next to him.
Okay.
I think he had a really strong season for the Revs. You know, working under Bruce Arena with all of his experience, and I mean, on another day, the Revs could have won MLS Cup last year. Let's be honest. They made a deep run in the playoffs. They shocked a lot of teams, and I think Kessler was a big part of that. I think he's a defender, and he's the youngest out of the group as well. He's one that we can all look out for this season, as maybe not move into a top European league, but at least establishing himself as a top five MLS centre back, and then see where that takes you. So I think that's your partnership. If I was picking the team, which some people might say is lucky or not, but
I know, I understand that. I do like Pineda. I think he's pretty good with the ball at his feet, which I think would be important in a Berhalter system. But I think, honestly, at this point, you're worried about beating Costa Rica and Dominican Republic and maybe a Honduras or Canada. So, is it so important to have that type of center back right now where you might have to play out of pressure? I don't necessarily think so. Maybe Costa Rica will be problematic in that regard, but I definitely think Justin Glad as a starter. I don't really know if the other two are that much different from the other, but I personally like Pineda a little bit better. Moving up, we got in this defensive midfield spots, Jackson Ewell from San Jose, and the newcomer to the U.S. system, Andreas Perea from Orlando City. Now, they're both listed as defensive midfielders, but I think they both do two very different things in that number 6 position. I feel like it's Ewell's spot to take, but tell me why Perea should probably be the starter, or why he should be the starter. Because I think Ewell's starting. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ewell is a star, and he was another one who I noted down as a player I really like on this roster, because I think he's just so graceful on the ball, and his passing range is incredible. He showed it off to the maximum against Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, he had more time and space, but I think he really made use of it and kept US ticking. But yeah, Andres Perea, new to the system. I mean, one of the reasons he might get a go is because they want to see what he's like for a start off, because he's not come directly through the system. It's time to blood him in. And I think maybe if Costa Rica, as you say, do give a bit more of a challenge in the US final third, maybe that's where Perea becomes a bit more useful. But no, I'm definitely with you on that one, where I think Ewell's ball capabilities are what's going to be more required for these games. It's only when you're coming up against a real powerhouse of a side that you're going to need a destroying number 6 or more of a defensive number 6, and I just don't see that being required for these games.
Yeah, even against Mexico, I'm curious to see how Kreis would approach that, because you kind of want to keep possession against Mexico, so you're not dealing so much with it defensively, and Ewell will definitely be a key in keeping possession for the US.
As well, another thing is you've got to look at the amount of experience that the US are bringing into this as well. I would argue it's probably far more experience than any other side in there, and you've got to back that. You've got to back that they're all confident enough to take the game to anyone. They shouldn't be scared of Mexico. So even there, maybe Jackson Ewell might be the right choice again.
Yeah.
Because he's trusted in one-on-one duels with San Jose and doing defensive duties there. So why can't you do it for the national team? And then you get everything that he's got on the ball as well.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Ewell has the most full senior national league team caps of this group. So he's played in CONCACAF competitions before in the Nations League. He has been starting for Berhalter on occasion. So I definitely he's by far the starter, but I really do want to see Perea in this tournament to see what he can do.
I would definitely agree with you.
And then, Berhalter kind of likes to play, you can call it a dual 8 position, maybe a dual 10 position. But this is Jason Kreis's team. I'm not sure how exactly he'll play it, but probably mimic what Berhalter does. So at that kind of more advanced midfield position, you have Georgi Mihailovic, Johnny Cardoso, and a surprise for me, Hassani Dotson. I did not expect Dotson to make this roster. I was really hoping that Frankie Amaya or Cole Bassett would make the roster because they're a little bit more creative, a little bit more a little bit better on the ball, but Dotson has, a little bit more experience in MLS. I combine that with Georgi Mihailovic, who has played for the U.S. men's national team and has tons of experience in MLS. And then another newcomer, Johnny Cardoso, who plays in Brazil and has been starting for Internacional on occasion. So it seems like this is a little bit of a weak spot, but then you dig into their careers and these players have pretty good experience.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Mihailovic is again, he's the standout in that position, and again, he's took the number 8 shirt, and I expect him to play there. I think he can pretty much be that middle link between a 6 and a 10, where he can play both roles really well, which translates to him being good in between them. He's not terrible defensively, but he definitely excels creatively, and I think that's going to be really important in breaking down these what I expect to be tightly packed defences who are going to bunker in and try and frustrate the US. So that's going to be really important. I think that the one that I want to see next to him is Johnny Cardoso, because I must confess, I've not seen too much of him myself, because Brazilian football is quite hard to come across over here in the UK unless you want to open a load of betting accounts and stream it that way. Yeah. But there's been a lot of talk about him, a lot of excitement. He seems to have got a lot of minutes for quite a big team in Brazil. So it'd definitely be interesting to see how he makes the transition there. But you mentioned Hassani Dotson. I mean, one reason he might have been included is for his versatility as well, because he can play in defence. And there's a couple of games I watched him at, especially at MLS's back last year for Minnesota, where he played fullback, and he was just unbelievable. His energy was just unreal. And maybe that could be a ploy where you play him as the 8, box to box, shuttling up and down, making sure everything's tight, nice and tight defensively, but making those lung busting runs forward, and then that allows Mihailovic even more freedom maybe to operate as a 10 and a more of a creative player. So that could be a nice balance in the midfield.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because you look at a roster, you're only allowed 20 players and 3 of those have to be a goalkeeper. So you've got to have players who are versatile. Again, we talked Aaron Herrera, able to play left or right back. That is an important quality to have. It's just being versatile, and Dotson does have versatility to play a number of different positions on the field. So, I don't necessarily rate him as highly as I would Amaya or Bassett, but you compare that to the fact that he can just play multiple positions. It's a really positive quality that he has.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely important on when you get to tournament rosters as well, as having 2 or 3 players in there that you can just you can throw them into a few different positions. I mean, I point to my own experience with England of the 2018 World Cup and someone like Eric Dyer, for example. He's nowhere near the most technically proficient player. He lacks in a couple of areas, but he can play fullback, centre back, and midfield. And it only takes a couple of injuries, and all of a sudden you're up against it, and they become the most important players in your team.
Yeah, you could possibly be playing 5 matches in 13 days. It's quite a tight squeeze there. Yeah. So being able to have someone ready like that is good. Yeah. Moving all the way up top, you've got your forwards: Jonathan Lewis from Colorado, Sebastian Saucedo from Pumas, Ulysses Yanez from Heerenveen on loan from Wolfsburg, Jesus Ferreira with Dallas, Sebastian Soto now officially with Norwich City, and Benji Michel from Orlando City. Now, it's weird because the U.S. both has a lot of talent in the forward line, but especially on this roster, there's no, other than Yanez, there's not a big standout talent, I don't think. But I don't think any of these players are bad, and I really do think that they could be effective against teams like Dominican Republic and Costa Rica. The big question I have is who's starting at that 9 position? Is it Ferreira? Is it Soto? What do you think happens there?
I think as much as everyone's getting excited about Soto finally ending up at Norwich in some description after all those work permit issues, I think he's got to be Jesus Ferreira. I know he had a bad season last season, but he was unbelievable against Trinidad and Tobago. And I think we've all seen that on his day, he can offer so much. He can drop between the lines and create space that way. He's quick enough to run in behind himself, and he can dribble. He can take a man on. And as we saw against Trinidad and Tobago, he got space, but you still got to finish the chances, and he did that in style. He can clearly finish, and I'm expecting a big year for him at Dallas, and I think this could be the start of it. So I think he's got to be rewarded for that last performance with a start here.
Yeah, I think Ferreira fits the system best. I will also say that Soto coming off the bench is not a bad idea. He's proven in these youth tournaments to be a very adept goal scorer, and has scored pretty well at the club level too. So having a guy who loves to score and can score is a good tool to have if you need to bring a guy in off the bench late. That I personally like Sebastian Soto a lot, but that's because I've seen him score in youth national team tournaments, so it's fun,
Yeah, it as well. Norwich worked hard to get him, which tells you a lot. So they're clearly very high on his talent, and I just think right now, if you're gonna face the two off against each other, I just think Jesus Ferreira's done more recently to warrant that chance. But it's definitely interesting. And as you say, with the fixture congestion, you're probably going to see rotation anyway, so they're all going to get a chance.
Yeah, that's pretty valid. I mean, I know in past Olympic tournaments, and really even any sort of Concacaf youth tournament, the U.S. tends to rotate a lot of starters from match to match. And I expect Christ to be able to do that here. You look at this roster as a whole, of all the 20, which one were you most excited that made this final roster and that you're most excited to watch in this tournament?
I looked through, and obviously I mentioned before that I picked out Sam Vines, I picked out Jackson Ewell, obviously Jesus Ferreira we've touched on as a really exciting player. I think it's got to be Uli Liners. Obviously, he's probably the most high-profile player in there, and the fact that it's just not gone well for him yet in Europe, it's so frustrating. And I think this is, by all accounts, I understand he's back home in the US at the moment as well. He's not even in Europe now. He was already back in the States. So this is a big chance for him to just get on the field in competitive, meaningful minutes and show everyone what he's really capable of. And, if it's not going to go well for him at Heerenveen on loan, if it's not going to go well for him at Wolfsburg, at least put himself in the shop window for another side who might want to take a chance on him, because it's been a rough ride so far, but he's clearly got a ton of talent. And I want to see what he's got, because I've not been able to watch enough of him because of his lack of minutes. So yeah,
it's hard to evaluate a player when you can't you can't watch him. I mean, even going to Heerenveen, he hasn't been playing a whole lot.
No.
And he wasn't playing a whole lot for Wolfsburg. He's the one I'm most excited to watch too, because I think he is the most creative player on this roster. So obviously you're going to be drawn to that. But if the U.S. wants to score goals, I think Yanez is going to be the guy who's going to have to some way, set that up, or if not score them himself. And I do want to take like a second to talk about the idea of what a tournament like this can do for someone's transfer value, because clubs are monitoring players at every level all across the world. I get that. But sometimes being in a youth World Cup or a youth tournament like this, or we've seen it at the Senior World Cup where a guy has a couple of good games in a row, scores, a couple of goals. All of a sudden that transfer value just skyrockets for, not a great display of how he'll do on a club team. But what do you think Yanez can do to not only just increase his transfer value, but make himself more lucrative to more clubs? Because who knows how it's going with Heerenveen. Not sure how his future with Wolfsburg is. What can he do to make himself look more desirable at the club level right now?
Well, I think that the most recent example I can for a player really sort of making people notice, unexpectedly making people notice him at a youth tournament. And I know he's not got his move yet and things haven't quite panned out, but it's one that we can both relate to with Ezekiel Barco.
Yeah.
With the U20 World Cup, was it? With Argentina. he had a great tournament, and all of a sudden, just like that, was it Sevilla, Arsenal, Napoli? They were all starting to get linked with him. I know, it's not quite worked for him yet, whether that be because he was injured under Martino a lot, and then De Boer, I think, was just a complete mismatch for him. We're all hoping. Yeah, there you go. So that shows you, though, how much at least talk a good tournament can bring you. And I think with Linus, he's just got to prove a point. He's scored a lot of goals already at youth level for the United States, and he's clearly got that in his locker, and he can clearly do it. It's just that kind of player at that age, it's very much they need a run of games and they need confidence. Yeah. And you'll find once he scores 1 or 2 goals for Heerenveen, or if he scores 1 or 2 goals for Heerenveen, he'll go on and get 6 or 7 more by the end of the season. He's got to go out there, get that fire in his belly and say, no, this is my chance to get on the pitch. I don't want to be rotated. I want to start every game because I've not been playing anyway.
Yeah.
Go and score 3 or 4 goals. And then the club have to notice him then. He can go back there and go, look, this is what you do when you give me a run. Where's my chance? He's got to put his foot down. He's got to start putting the marker down. And I think this is a good place to do it. There's some teams there where, with no disrespect meant, he can dunk on him a little bit if he really turns up and really pad his stats out, and he can go and give that to Heerenveen or Wolfsburg and say, if you're not going to play me, give me a move and I'll show you what you're missing.
Yeah, I think Yanez has the most to prove, but I think he's the one who, it's not a negative. I think he actually can prove it. I think it's just a matter of getting the time and the minutes on the field to do it. So we talked about the one that we're most excited to see. Who was the player or a player who you're kind of like most disappointed didn't make this roster? Obviously, no one who clearly would not have been, released by their club team. We're not talking Christian Pulisic or Weston McKennie, but someone who maybe should have been included in this roster. Who would that be for you?
I mean, you stole Caden Cowell from me, so I'll pick somebody different. I would have liked to see Gianluca Busio on there.
Yes,
I know midfield is a bit of a spot where, they're quite well stacked. Not so much in the creative department, but at least at 6 and 8, they're quite well stacked. But he's a player that really started to impress me the more that last season went on, and I think he started to peak by the time the playoffs come round. I mean, that goal against the Earthquakes in the playoffs that was what I think is the player he's going to become. He starts deep, he makes the late run, takes the finish brilliantly. I spoke to him for 1 goal last month, and obviously there's quite a lot of talk about what he was like as a number 6, but I mean, he said to me that he's a player there, and he's working on the defensive side of his game, but he wants to be involved in the final third, getting goals and assists. And as we've mentioned, that is arguably what this squad's missing.
Yeah,
in the midfield is goals and assists and creativity. So I think he's a player that he's got a lot of belief in himself. He's generating a lot of interest from some big clubs in Europe. I mean, obviously Barcelona were linked with him, Fiorentina were linked with him. And from everything he said to me when I spoke to him, he's really ready to make an impression. So I think if there's one player I'd pick out, I thought, he deserves a chance, and I think he could really make use of these minutes. Yeah, I think Gianluca Busio.
I think Busio, it may just be like not his time yet. He is younger.
How young he is.
Yeah, I seriously, I do. I mean, he's barely 18. It's like he's such a young, not even inexperienced. He's young. The player, honestly, I wish were in this roster was Jeremy Ebobisse from Portland. I think that he offers, because he can play centrally, he can play on the wing, and again, that versatility. But again, we're talking creativity and a guy who likes to score. He always finds himself in good positions. He always makes things happen for his team, and clearly Portland are a team that's done well, and he's been a part of that. Maybe not the catalyst, but he's been a part of a team that's been pretty successful during his time there. So Ebobisse is the guy who I wish were in this.
Yeah, I think he's one of those players where I think he's a 7 out of 10 at scoring. I think he's a 7 out of 10 at creating, and he's still quite young. He's got hence why he was in contention for this. So those ratings are only going to go up, and definitely, I think he'd have gone in there as one of the most experienced players on the roster. He's been doing it for a couple of years now in Portland, and the more you see him, the more he impresses you. He's quick, he's direct when he needs to be, he's skillful. he's quite good at passing. His positional intelligence seems to be really good for a player his age. So
you're saying all the reasons why he should be on this roster, and he's not. It's just really
yeah, he can definitely be disappointed, but I think there'll be plans for him a bit further up the system in the next year or so.
I'm hoping so. He does deserve it. He's put in a great time with Portland. So let's take a look at this from, the point that matters here, right? We're trying to qualify for the Olympics for the first time since 2008. It's shocking that the United States hasn't made an Olympic tournament for the past 2 cycles. It really was, I'll say this, it was the biggest indictment that I have of the Jurgen Klinsmann era, because I think that you look at why we failed in this past World Cup qualifying cycle is because you could clearly see that the 2 age groups that would have helped us get to the 2012 and 2016 Olympics were just not great. Now, that's not Klinsmann's fault. He's not coaching them, but it's still, something that they never did. And it definitely was a hindrance in this past World Cup cycle. So we're trying to qualify for this 2021 Summer Olympics in Tokyo. We're in Group A with Costa Rica. We play them first, Dominican Republic second, and Mexico third. First question is, do we get out of the group, and how?
Yes. I mean, obviously, Mexico and Costa Rica are in Concacaf. They're quite scary names. Obviously, Mexico especially for obvious reasons, but Costa Rica as well. They're quite scary names in the region. But as we mentioned before, I don't think any of them are going to bring a side more experienced than the US. You touched on Jurgen Klinsmann before and that era of US soccer, and I don't think you can specifically blame him. But I think he does. I think you're right. I think he has a level of responsibility to accept. And you listen to any player interviewed from his reign and his time in the system, and I'm struggling to find many who speak positively. There seems to be a rot throughout the system where players weren't getting chances, players were being mistreated, and players were being spoken to in a way I wouldn't like to be spoken to, and players being shut out for no apparent reason, so on and so forth. That's a story for another time. But I think they get out the group. They've got far too much experience not to. They play really attractive football. They've shown that already with a lot of these players played against Trinidad and Tobago last month. They've shown that when they come up against an opponent that's again, with no disrespect meant, inferior to them, they'll put them to the sword. And their experience in MLS is going to count for a lot in this.
Yeah, I think a lot will be learned from that first match against Costa Rica, because Costa Rica historically at the senior level are very good in CONCACAF. They are up and down at the youth level. This seems to be a really quality group of players they have at this U23 level. In fact, bring it back a little bit to Atlanta United, 7 of the players on this Costa Rican squad are on the Alajuelense roster, who Atlanta will play in their first match for CONCACAF Champions League. And that club has been doing quite well in Costa Rican League recently. So, clearly there are players playing at a high level in terms of playing first team minutes in Costa Rica. But, I mean, you have to evaluate. I know MLS isn't the best, but like MLS starter versus a Costa Rican starter, you'd hope that the MLS starter is winning out.
Yeah. I mean, I know you can turn around and say the US as a country is a more attractive place for Europe to scout, but Europe is scouting MLS talents for a reason as well. And then they're going over there and it's translating to success. And a lot of these players, as I've mentioned, I think are going to move to Europe in the next 18 months. I don't think I can say the same for the likes of Costa Rica and even Mexico. That pipeline is just not opened up. And I think that's for a reason. The technical ability throughout that squad is superior to, I think, anything that they're going to come up against. The only thing that worries me, and it's the thing that always worries me about any MLS team that goes into the CONCACAF Champions League game against these Central American sides especially, is if this turns into a bit of a bar fight, what happens then?
Yeah, that's the question, right?
Yeah, there's not many guys in there who I would say actually that's where he excels and he's really up for the fight. That's the one area where I'd be like, yeah.
I don't think Jackson Ewell is the guy who you're expecting to be holding that down.
No, I mean, for all the criticism that he gets, and maybe I'm going to give an unpopular opinion here, I think that's one of the reasons Michael Bradley's lasted so long in the national team, is that kind of experience. He's been there and he's done it. Concacaf is very, very unique, with a unique set of challenges. You can turn up and just get kicked off the field, and you've made all the passes, but you've conceded out. I think if there's one area where I think teams could hurt the US is if they make it a dirty game and they make it a bit of a bar fight, but as long as the US dominate the ball and keep the cool and stick to the principles, I think they should be able to get through no problem.
Yeah, I mean, Dominican Republic should be an easy, let's be honest, should be a walkover, really. And then the Mexico match hopefully shouldn't matter, right? Like, hopefully you've got 2 wins in the bag. You face Mexico, and really you're just playing for first or second place. It matters in some sense, but really the other group, you've got Honduras, El Salvador, Canada, and Haiti. Honduras is pretty good. I don't think anyone else is going to challenge the U.S. or Mexico for that matter. I really don't see – if the U.S. does not qualify here, it's a massive problem, right?
Yeah. Well, given the excitement and the way that we all like to talk MLS up, if they go and crash out of this group now, I think it's going to be a massive disappointment with the players that are in that squad.
Yeah, it would be a disappointment on many levels, to say the least. Okay, so we agree. U.S. should qualify. I don't think that's not a hot take. I don't think that's anything controversial. Do you think they could win the tournament, though? I mean, they may have to play Mexico in that final, and that would be a second match against Mexico. It doesn't really matter, but do you think they could win the tournament?
I think it does matter, because I think you're putting down a marker straight away as well, and I think a lot of these players are still wet behind the ears internationally, and to go and basically come out on top in qualifying and win. I think that's important, to be the best in your region. We've talked about that at a club level for years. Being the best in your region's got to come first. So I think if they've got any hopes of winning gold at the Olympics, go and qualifying first. If you look across the other side, I think if this was in about 2 or 3 years' time, Canada would worry me. Because I think the development, I think it's following a similar path to the US, but I just think it's a few years behind. Obviously, Canadian Premier League starting up is going to be a big help to sort of jump charge that and get quicker, but they don't worry me yet. I think the biggest test would come if both the US and Mexico got back to the final. But again, I'm going to go down to experience, and I'm going to go down to a lot of the players in this US squad as well. Something we haven't mentioned that goes with that experience is experience in knockout games, because obviously MLS, a lot of players going deep into playoffs and playing in the knockout scene, and MLS is back as well for stuff like any sort of straight knockout game has a completely different feel to it.
I mean, Jason Kreis, the coach, has an MLS Cup championship and has coached in many playoff matches. So, I hadn't even considered Kreis as a part of that equation, but it's true. I mean, that does help. All right, so I appreciate so much this perspective on this U23 roster, and I'm excited. I think you're excited. I think it's easy to criticize the players as individuals, but I think on the whole, this roster is pretty strong for the competition we're about to go face.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone over a few players we'd like to see, and James Sands, for example, is another one who I'd have loved to have seen in there. But I think it speaks volumes to the depth that's coming through now that we can be disappointed at 4 or 5 players getting in, and yet we can look at it and say probably still decent favourites. I mean, the only task for me now is trying to find somewhere where I can stream the game. That's going to be over in the UK again. U23 and Olympic qualifiers and stuff like that, they're hard to come across. So I'll find some. I
know it's on broadcast television here in the States, so that helps.
I'll find some legal way to do it. Don't worry.
Well, I mean, okay, we talked about that. I mean, you clearly had this problem for a lot of the things you do because you are covering, I think, every inch of the globe when it comes to football. What all are you like? Give me a good glimpse of everything that you do in terms of your writing profession.
I mean, going back to the start of how I got into it, I quit a job at electrical wholesalers that was basically running me into the ground, and I hated. I'd always wanted to write. I'd always loved the game, and I just got to a point where I was sick of my job, and I thought, let's put the two together. Quit, enrolled in a course, got qualified, and landed on my feet. Luckily, halfway through the 2018 World Cup, I just happened to land with Squawka on a trial shift and never looked back. So
that's awesome.
But I mean, an average week for me, there's a lot of daytime stuff for Squawka, sort of preview writing and stuff like that, and a lot of research on, every day you come across a team that you've never covered before and you have to put the research in. And then at night during MLS season, it's staying up, watching the games, covering the games, trying to get as many interviews as I can, and like we've done here, trying to balance it between the two time zones and stuff like that. It's a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of getting to bed at 4 a.m. and getting back up and starting work at 9. But I would have it any other way. I'd move to the States, and that's my plan in a couple of years' time. Hopefully, the world would be, you'd like to think, back to normal by then, and I can make the move. But for now, I make the best of it. And I always think if you're not working hard, you're not moving forward. And I think hard work can win out over anything. So yeah, maybe I'm at a disadvantage over in the UK, but I make up for it in a strong work ethic, I'd like to think.
That's awesome. I mean, you do write a lot. Your name has come across my timeline for a lot of different outlets. So I'm really thankful that you have lent your writing and your voice to the world of football. It's been a pleasure to have encountered your work in the wild, if you will. You mentioned MLS. We found out some opening matches, home and away. First 2 weeks of MLS season have kind of been settled, but let's just real quick. You cover Atlanta United, you cover MLS. Who right now do you think is the favorite to make MLS Cup final? That's a loaded question in March, but hey.
From I think Columbus have still got to be the favourites to win it again. I know that's not an unpopular opinion, and maybe a lot of people are maybe hoping for a bit more of a.
No, it's the correct opinion at this point.
Yeah, they took the best team in the league last year. I know they didn't win the Supporters' Shield, but they fulfilled the potential for how they would have done. They took the strongest team in the league and made it stronger. Bradley Wright Phillips coming in, Kevin Molino coming in. They're two incredible signings. On the other side, I mean, obviously your go-to is usually Seattle because they've just got so much continuity there. But obviously Jordan Morris has gone out on loan, then got injured. Obviously, I think Gustav Svensson's no longer there. So, there's a couple of important players going there and not a lot of wiggle room budget-wise either with Morris now being back and commanding that DP slot again, but being out of action. So how they're going to work that roster is going to be very interesting. I'm going to stick my neck out and maybe not go all the way, but I think FC Dallas could surprise a few this season.
Okay.
I think it's about time they translated that youth development into success on the pitch themselves rather than just sending everyone to Europe. Obviously, we've talked about Jesus Ferreira on here already, but another one that I'm really high on, he's probably my favourite young player, full stop at the moment in MLS, is Paxton Pomykal. Heavily disrupted by injuries so far, but on his day, there's nothing he can't do in that midfield. He's so good on the ball and so press resistant. His passing range is fantastic. He's got a great engine. The way he makes his tackles, because he's a small guy as well, he can't muscle someone off the ball, but he has a good centre of gravity where he can get himself in the way at the right time and nick the ball rather than bully somebody off it. A very intelligent player. And then obviously Tanner Tessman, who just seems to be an absolute machine of a midfield. He's so big but so elegant, and he's not going to get outdone in the air. With his size comes strength, but I think he's proven his ability on the ball. So there's a lot of technical ability in there. They've got the likes of Matt Hedges back there as well. There's a roster there I'm looking at with just a lot of talent on it that hasn't gone as far as it should do in the last couple of years for me. And they're one of the most hyped up teams in MLS at the moment for the wrong reasons from a fan perspective. And I'd like to see that translate onto the pitch. So maybe not all the way, but I think they might surprise a few people.
I think that's a fair point on Dallas, where the question does have to come, are you just making players to go sell to Europe? Like, is that your only goal as a club? Or do you plan on trying to win a cup? Because I don't think selling the likes of Brian Reynolds and Reggie Cannon and even a Weston McKennie, even though I didn't really play for them, I don't think that puts fans in the stands. And quite honestly, that's the goal should be the goal of a club. And the way you put fans in stands is you win.
I mean, you look at someone in the same conference, look at LAFC. They came into the league. The first year was very similar to Atlanta's first year. You know, they shocked everyone by making the playoffs, created an incredible fan culture by being successful on the pitch. The next year, they go and win Supporters' Shield. And let's be honest, in the last 2 years, if they'd have kept a full and healthy squad and fulfilled the potential, they might well have been back-to-back MLS Cup champions. So that's another team you can't discount. But going out there and being successful and attractive on the pitch, you know, they even got to the CCL final and were minutes away from winning it before that collapse. So, and look at the fan culture that it's created with it. Obviously, they came in strong with the fans, but it's only ramped that up with success. And I think, you know, Dallas are a club that have suffered in the stands in the last few years, and I think starting to win games on the pitch and giving the fans something back for the patience they've given so far would be great to see this year, and I think it'd bring a lot back into the stadium.
I think Dallas they have such a great source of talent that I really do want to see them try to put it all together. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. And the last question before I get you out of here is, how have you been to the States for a match? And if so, I mean, how did you feel about it? Or
not yet, and it kills me to say it because honestly, I get the odd day off now and again, and I just sit here thinking, I just really want to go now. I'm ready to go. So as soon as this pandemic ends, I'm already speaking to a few Atlanta fans as well. And
we will welcome you in Atlanta.
Yeah, I'm already putting the feelers out for places to stay and people to go with. So hopefully next year I'm going to make it happen, and then the year after move over there. So.
Well, you know, we've got a very jam-packed U.S. schedule coming up this year. I think every national team is at that, right, where it just seems like there's a match every month. So I'm glad that you are here to help provide some perspective and some insight into the U.S. men's national team pool, and I appreciate your time doing it here to talk about the U23 roster and the Olympics.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Anytime.
And just tell us all where we can find your work and how to follow you.
So on Twitter, as you mentioned at the start of the show, at CJSmith91. I am now on Instagram as well, trying to build my very small following. It's Chris_Smith_MLS. So you can follow me on there. And then obviously, if you want to read what I write, keep an eye out on One Goal, Squawker. Obviously, occasionally I'll jump up on Dirty South Soccer and just keep your eye out on Twitter. I always post everything on there.
Well, again, thank you so much for being here, and hope to welcome you to the States in the next few years.
Yeah. Let's hope. Fingers crossed. Thank you.
Well, again, thanks to Chris Smith for joining this episode of Soccer for Us. Go follow him on Twitter at CJSmith91. Just want to run through the schedule that the U.S. youth team is going to face in this Olympic qualification tournament. They opened the tournament, actually, they're the first game of the tournament, on March 18, that's a Thursday, against Costa Rica at 5 p.m. on Fox Sports 1. So big test right off the bat. On Sunday, March 21, they play Dominican Republic at 7 p.m. An easier matchup, one that they should win and score a lot of goals. And then they end the group stage against Mexico on March 24 at 9:30 p.m. That's a late start, but it's actually the prime time slot in Mexico. So that's your group stage, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Mexico. Depending on where we finish, we will have a semifinal match on Sunday, March 28. You have to win that match. You have to get to that match and win it to qualify for the Olympics. And then the final is on Tuesday, March 30 at 9 p.m. All these games are going to be on Fox Sports 1. Thanks again for listening to this breakdown of the U.S. men's Olympic qualifying roster. 20 guys are making it. Hopefully these guys can get us back to the Olympics for the first time since 2008. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerForUsPod. Tweet your thoughts to me so I can interact with you and then also share them on the recap show. And I will have a preview for you coming up later this month of the senior men's national team friendlies. Then we'll have a recap of those friendlies and of the Olympic qualifying tournament as a whole. Lots to talk about this month. Hope you stick around. I'm Bart Keeler. I'm out.